Well, good morning to you all. Bonjour à tout le monde. As most of you are aware, this seminar, the Next Generation Seminar, is a foundational program of the Africa Center. The intent of this program is to bring together military and eventually and increasingly small numbers of civilians from across Africa, from as many countries and as many settings as possible, to discuss leadership. And by leadership, we mean many things. Knowledge and strategic awareness, an understanding of national interests and national capacities, the promotion of professionalism and respect for ethical values, the ability to marshal resources and motivate and guide colleagues. Over the next several weeks, you will delve into these different aspects of leadership in plenary and in small group discussions. You will discover that more often than not, good questions are easier to come by than firm answers. Indeed, it is not the purpose of the Africa Center to propose answers or deliver solutions. Our aim is to encourage a rich discussion, a broad debate, one that hopefully leads you to a deeper understanding of the complexity of military leadership today in modern Africa. In addition to the presentations and plenary discussions and small group meetings you will participate in, you will also have the opportunity to interact with U.S. government officials and to travel a bit, including to the United Nations in New York. I encourage you to use these opportunities not only to learn a little more about the United States, but also to learn more about each other and to forge what I hope will be long-lasting professional relationships. Now, this is an especially appropriate moment for a workshop devoted largely to issues of military and security sector leadership. Across Africa, and indeed in areas adjacent to Africa, we have witnessed over the past year historic events. We are still experiencing the aftershocks of an upheaval that began with a single individual's protest against injustice, a small act magnified many times over by the power of modern social media. Citizens have claimed their rights. Long-serving political leaders have been expelled from office. Old political orders have been challenged, shaken to their foundations, or simply overthrown. There is still much uncertainty over what the new political order or the new political disorder will look like. Sub-Saharan Africa is not isolated from these powerful currents of social and political change. Protests inspired by the Arab Spring broke out in at least a dozen African countries last year. None produced the same dramatic results seen in North Africa or Yemen, although it is not hard to see reflections in Sub-Saharan Africa of the same conditions that sparked revolts elsewhere. And what are those conditions? Let me suggest just a few. Where heads of state have been in power for too long, where long-serving leaders seek to create family dynasties, where democracy may be practiced as a formality, but where elections never really allow for a genuine transfer of power, and where restless and increasingly well-educated young people and middle classes have access to social media. These are some of the more obvious key ingredients in the kind of people power protests we have seen over the past year. And it would be a mistake to assume that sub-Saharan Africa is immune to these trends. But it is not only or even primarily domestic political protests that have challenged African states this past year. Armed conflict has also posed special challenges. Examples are the final stage of the civil war in Côte d'Ivoire and the forcible removal from power of a discredited president there. The secession of South Sudan and the violence that has accompanied this transition. The full emergence of a deadly and apparently well-organized insurgency in Nigeria. And the reappearance of a particularly violent historical revolt in northern Mali and across parts of the Sahel. And we could all cite other examples. Whether it is responding to these violent insurgencies or responding to less violent but equally dramatic political protests, African militaries today face enormous pressures. In many cases, hard fundamental choices are in play, not just for military leaders, but sometimes also for ordinary soldiers. There will be time during this seminar to examine in greater detail how military establishments across Africa are reacting to these challenges. But I have no doubt that in a few years' time we will be using case studies from today's crises to analyze how well or how badly militaries are performing. Whatever the nature of the challenges facing African security sectors today, certain basic rules of military conduct still apply. Foremost among these rules is that professional militaries cannot function as the agent of a ruler or a ruling family or a ruling elite. Militaries do not serve families or clans or tribes or factions. Militaries do not serve parties. They do not even serve governments. Militaries serve the nation in the broadest sense. They serve and protect the public. And for militaries to play this role, they must do so within a legal and constitutional framework that has broad legitimacy. It is often the case that pressures on African militaries to serve partisan interests arise not so much from the ambitions of military leaders, but rather from the demands of political office holders. And while not all African military organizations have been able to resist such pressure in recent times, it is encouraging to note that many have. We have seen recent examples where militaries resist demands to act on behalf of governing authorities that have lost legitimacy. And knowing when that line must be crossed, that line between respect for legitimate civilian authority and resistance to illegitimate civilian authority is one of the hardest ethical questions military leaders must confront. What is clear is that whenever and wherever that line is crossed, it is incumbent on the military that serves the nation to do everything possible to ensure public safety, to ensure public order, and to ensure a quick restoration of legitimate civilian authority. It is never the business of militaries to replace civilian leaders or to govern. And while it may be difficult in some circumstances to organize a rapid restoration of civilian authority in post-crises or post-conflict situations, it should never be the preferred course that the military remain in power beyond the minimum time needed to ensure a transition. Well, you will have much to discuss in this seminar. And to get you off to a good start, Colonel Emil Udriago will be speaking to you shortly. But before I introduce Emil, let me remind all of our participants of the rules of engagement here at the Africa Center, and these are rules of strict non-attribution. Nothing you say and nothing you hear in question and answer sessions or in small group discussion is for attribution outside this seminar. And we have found over the years that this non-attribution policy is the best way of encouraging the kinds of open and frank discussions that we think are vital to the success of our programs. So thank you all again for coming such a long way to spend these 3 weeks with us here, and welcome again to the Africa Center for Strategic Studies.